Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Raiders of the Sands by Francis Summers Cox. This episode is Chapter 11, The Terrible River, dated January 1703. But for all the marvels of Axum and the Queen of Sheba's country, it was the days ahead that really burnt themselves into Abraham's memory. Like day 19, the day they crossed the terrible river. Its valley was terrible enough. A long, slow, tricky climb down. The magnificent tribute horses and the loaded donkeys and the mules behind and in front of them, slipping and stumbling in the loose, dry soil, and the air getting hotter and heavier with every step down. Although the sun was not yet up, the big rains were over long ago, but the river was full, fast moving, and very wide. As they got nearer the bottom of the valley, Abraham, riding Butterfly, and Fares, the Lord of the Sea, on Thunder, they could see the wide sandy beach below them, full of warriors and donkey drivers, rushing toward the water, screaming at the top of their lungs, hurling stones and bits of branch, anything that came to hand, into the water, firing their muskets. Abraham looked wildly from this scene of madness to his father's face, and in spite of himself reached over as if to take hold of his arm. His father laughed. "Don't worry. They're just chasing away the crocodiles. We've no time to lose. We need to start crossing at once. I don't want anyone spending the night down here. There's disease in these hot valleys." They watched while the men let the horses drink, and then started leading them into the water. The valley echoed with sound of neighing, shouting, and cursing. And then the first horses started swimming across, their riders hanging on to their tails. A cheer went up from Abraham's side when the first horse and rider came up, dripping on the other bank. Abraham went to give Butterfly and himself a drink, keeping a careful lookout for crocodiles, and then tied her up in the shade of a tree. "She'll need all the rest she can get if she's going to swim across that," he muttered to himself. He didn't like to think what he might need to make the same journey. Meanwhile, the donkey and mule drivers were starting to unload their pack animals. "How are the loads going to get across, Father?" "You'll see. Look." Behind them on the bank, the donkey drivers and a crowd of men and women from the last village were gathered round, and were doing mysterious things with ropes and sticks and animal skins. Abraham went across to investigate. "Rafts? Are you making rafts?" The villagers nodded. The ground was piled with blown up goat skins, like heaps of headless bodies. He picked one up, and it was light as a handful of cotton. They were tying them underneath the rough wooden platforms. Abraham looked from the rafts to the enormous stacks of goods that needed to get across and exclaimed, "Are we ever going to do it?" He thought of the bright silks and velvets inside the bundles. They would never survive a wetting, and although he didn't know much about guns, he knew they didn't like water either. About half the donkeys and mules were across by now, and the Lord of the Sea announced, "Right, let's get us 2 across now. Not nervous, are you, little monk? I'll be right next to you." Abraham grinned brightly and set about strapping his few belongings onto Butterfly's back. It all started off fine. Butterfly waded in with only a bit of head tossing and eye rolling, and then he followed. The water felt very warm. Soon it was up to his chest, and he knew that he'd have to let his feet come up from the bottom. He twisted Butterfly's tail firmly round one hand and started swimming. He could feel Butterfly thrusting strongly through the water, pulling him across. The current was strong, but the mule was stronger. To his left, the upstream side, he could just see, out of the corner of his eye, his father and Thunder doing the same. "Hey, little monk, enjoying your swim?" He was concentrating too hard to answer, but as a matter of fact, it was almost beginning to be fun. And everything carried on fine until the middle of the river. Then he knew how. He never knew how. Everything turned hideous. There were donkeys and mules swimming across on his right, the downstream side, as well as in front of him. Maybe Butterfly got kicked by the donkey in front of her, or some water went up her nose, or maybe it was just that the current got too strong. But suddenly, she started panicking, whinnying, and choking as she breathed in water, plunged and rolled and splashing. He held on to her tail for dear life as he was pulled this way and that, his head tugged under the water and out again. He choked as he breathed in a great gasp of water. Suddenly he felt a hand under his armpit and knew that his father was holding him. He let go Butterfly's tail. But Butterfly must have kicked the donkey on her right because it started panicking too, bucking and snorting and spluttering. By the time Thunder had pulled him and his father across, they were standing panting and dripping on the bank, watching the river. Butterfly had calmed down and was swimming quietly across as though nothing had happened. But the donkey that Butterfly had kicked was being swept downstream in an awful hubbub of splashing and choking. Every watcher stood silently, following it with his eyes until, just before the distant bend in the river, a large scaly shape slid off a rock and swam toward the beast. There was a sudden stillness, and the donkey vanished under the water. And that's the end of chapter 11.